will never be granted access to the throne of God apart from the Savior to be right before God. Jesus has made the way. We talked about that from Hebrews last week. The way we return to God is made clear in Hebrews. Jesus is the way.
There is love that came for us, humble to a sinner's cross. You broke my shame and sinfulness. You rose again, victorious. He saved your soul? Has He made you whole? Come on, worship Him. Let His name be lifted higher this morning. Hallelujah. So let your name be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. So let your name be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. Hallelujah. So let your name be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. So let your name be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. Be lifted higher. You are stronger. You are stronger. Sin is broken. You have saved me. It is written. Christ is risen. One more time, let's sing it. Jesus, you are Lord of all. You are stronger. You are stronger. Sin is broken. You have saved me. It is written. Christ is risen. Jesus, you are Lord of all.
As we continue to walk through the Old Testament and nearing the end of our journey of the Old Testament, coming to our second message from Zechariah. And you will remember from our last message on Zechariah that Zechariah is ministering during a time when the exiles have returned to Jerusalem. They've returned home, and it's a time when the temple of God is being rebuilt in Jerusalem. And so Zechariah is one of those prophets that speaks to these exiles who have been returned and provides encouragement, not just about the rebuilding of the temple, but the rebuilding of their devotion to God. So it's more than just a construction project of a physical structure. It's reconstructing the devotion and dedication and obedience and faithfulness to God. And so last week we learned in the opening chapter of Zechariah that there is a word that comes from the Lord, a word that is very straightforward. And we said that it's a word that sort of resonates throughout the New Testament in the book of James and Hebrews, where God says, "Return to me and I will return to you. Return to me and I will return to you." And the reason for that word from the Lord is easily found in chapter 1, because the problem had been their unfaithfulness, their straying from their devotion to God. They fell into idolatry. But even more so, specifically, it speaks to the fact that they didn't listen to the prophets. When God would send word to them about their disobedience, when God would speak to them through the prophets, the word that came is that your fathers didn't listen, your fathers did not heed the warnings of the prophets, and so it's time to return. Don't do as they have done, but return to the Lord, and God promises to return to you. And when you look at Zechariah and what comes from that, I want to draw your attention, just by way of introduction, to another verse in Zechariah, and that comes in the second chapter. In the 13th verse, if you want to mark Zechariah 2:13, you'll see a verse that leads and it leans into some of the prophecies and the revelations that come following chapter 2. And that is a verse, chapter 2, verse 13, where it says, "Be silent. Be silent." And then there is a picture of God that is given. Be silent, and the description for me is sort of as if God is on the throne of the universe, and God rises up and stands up from His throne, and He leans forward. This is my description of verse 13. And we are called, along with those to whom Zechariah speaks, to give heed and to listen to what God has to say. Because what follows after God rises up from His throne, His habitation, His dwelling place, we are called to be silent because God is standing up to reveal some things. And as you walk through the following chapters, what you find is that there are a series of revelations, a series of visions. Some of them may be more easily understood than others, but this series of visions begins to reveal God's plan of redemption, His plan of judgment, His plan of deliverance. And in the midst of these visions, you'll find something interesting about Zechariah. And that is that Zechariah has more prophecies about the Messiah than any other book in the Old Testament other than Isaiah. And this prophet that's sort of tucked away near the end of the Old Testament, maybe or maybe not, it's a book that you've studied a lot. But I wanted to draw your attention to that because if you've overlooked Zechariah, you've missed something significant, and that is that there are more pictures of the Messiah in this Old Testament book than any other book other than Isaiah in the Old Testament. And so it's good to look at Zechariah. It's good to take a look and say, how is it, Zechariah, that you promise the coming of the Messiah? What do you have to say about the deliverer? What do you have to say about Jesus? What do you have to say in this time that would cause them to be silent and listen as God stands up and begins to speak about the Messiah? Now, when I work through that, I also want to note to you that there's something very powerful also. And if you've memorized a verse in Zechariah, I suspect that it's Zechariah 4:6 that you've memorized, because it is there that this Zerubbabel, who is rebuilding the temple, receives a great word from the Lord. And it's a great word for us that God encourages him, and he says, it's not by might, it's not by power, but, somebody finish that for me. Very good, O ye students of Zechariah. Not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Now, if you're going to memorize a verse from Zechariah, let me just say that's a great one to memorize, because it not only speaks a great truth to the leadership who rebuilding the temple of God, but I would go ahead and enlarge it and say it speaks a great truth to each and every one of us in all of our endeavors in life to remember we have a tendency to rely upon our own strength, do we not? True? We have a tendency to even look at our accomplishments in life and say it was by my strength, it was by my power, it was by my intellect, it was by my ingenuity, it was by my effort. We have a tendency to do that, and what that does is it takes us down a path that gets us in trouble, because we begin to remove ourselves from giving glory to God when God deserves the glory. It begins to remove ourselves. We remove ourselves from this recognition and acknowledgement that the wisdom of the Proverbs would say, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him. Isn't this just a restatement of the proverb? Isn't this in many ways just a restatement of that great deep truth that we should acknowledge God in all our ways rather than trusting in our own understanding? And when we do have understanding, do we realize that we should give recognition to God and say that fear of the Lord is the beginning of understanding? A reverent acknowledgement of God is the beginning of wisdom. Every good and perfect gift comes from God, including our accomplishments in life. And so, I would encourage it. Zechariah is a great book. I guess this is my sales pitch. Before we get out of the Old Testament, I hope you've fallen in love with the Old Testament. I hope you've fallen in love with the Old Testament. I hope that when you decide to read a book sometime in the future, that you don't just turn to Psalms first because you love Psalms. You would say, you know what, I think I'll read Zechariah today. It's a great book. And when you look at what's coming up, I want to talk now and focus our attention this morning on this promise of the Messiah. I want us to take a look at how this promise unfolds, because as the word of the Lord and these visions are presented, they reveal to us the Messiah. They reveal to us some things about the Messiah. I could spend time going through some 10 pictures and prophecies of the Messiah, but I've chosen 2 that I want to talk about because they have a particular strong message for us today. The first one I want us to look at is in Zechariah 9:9. Zechariah 9:9. And if you may have noticed this reading in the Gospels. You may have noticed maybe a cross-reference or a note to the prophet Zechariah in verse 9:9, this picture of the Messiah that's given. So I'd like for you to look at Zechariah 9:9. Follow along with me as we look at this verse. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, it's been a few weeks since Palm Sunday, but I suspect you recognize that what the prophet gives to us and this revelation of God is quite a striking picture of what we refer to as the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. It's what we celebrate on Palm Sunday and we talk about. But Zechariah describes this through the prophetic revelation of the Lord in chapter 9 and verse 9. I want to draw attention to several details in this. First of all, when you read Zechariah 9:9, the description of a king is provided. There is a description of a king provided. And listen to the description. It says, behold, pay attention. Look at this. Behold, your king is coming to you. Your king is coming to you. Now, this is, of course, in general speaking to the people of Jerusalem. But it also, I want to just kind of connect that with the geography of Jerusalem. Because these are exiles who have returned to Jerusalem. These are exiles who have been under the power and the rule and the reign of a king of a foreign country. Difficult time. These are exiles who have returned to Jerusalem. And the word of the Lord comes. And that word says, behold, your king is coming to you. And I'm going to speak of that just in geographic terms for a minute to say that it's a picture of the King of Kings, is going to come to Jerusalem. I also want to just share, as I read that, one of the things that impresses my heart about this is that the King is coming to them. The King is coming to them. I don't know about you, but if I envision a conversation with a king, and I think about the king, my picture, my mind's eye, there's always a picture of me approaching the throne humbly. If I'm going to speak to the king, if I'm going to have an audience with a king, if I'm going to have any kind of interaction with a king, the mental picture that I have is always of me approaching the king, and however physically I demonstrate that humility, in my mind's eye, I have me bowing before the king as is appropriate. I come to the king. I approach the throne. The king does not step out from the throne and come to where I am. That's not the picture that this paints of the king. That's not the revelation of God of the king who's coming to them, to Jerusalem and to the people of God. That's not the way God describes it. The way God describes it is the king comes from the throne to Jerusalem, and that is significant. Now, listen. In between another description of the king's arrival, there are 2 words that I want you to notice. Justice and salvation. Justice and salvation. Justice, of course, it draws attention to the character of the king. And if you look at this for a moment, it says, he is just. It's a character description. It is a picture of what kind of king, of the character and the person. This king is just. This king is righteous. This king is pure. This king is wise and wonderful. But you know, he is just. Therefore, and we've talked about this in the Old Testament, that justice is attached to righteousness. It's attached to this knowing what is right and doing what is right and executing it in a just manner. This is the character of the king. But also the other picture that I want you to notice in this other word is salvation. Salvation. That begins to allow the story to unfold. The king is coming to you. He is just. Now in the context, in the big picture of God, in the big picture of God's Word, what this tells us is that He is just. We are sinful. I'll say more about this in a moment, but remember the context of chapter 1 of Zechariah is your fathers haven't listened. They haven't paid attention to the warnings of the prophets. You have drifted. You're unfaithful. Be silent. Pay attention, because the just king is coming. And when you think about the king executing judgment, you want to make sure, am I righteous before the king? Am I? What will be the judgment of the king? What will be the judgment of the king when I am in his presence? Will he deem me to be fit? Will he deem me? And what we know from the New Testament is all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We're all in the same boat when it comes to how fit we are to be in the presence of a just king. We're not fit. We're guilty. So, this king comes, he comes to us, and he has salvation. And he has salvation. That tells us the character of the king is just. That is a character trait that God will never forsake. God will always be just. However, God also is merciful, and we'll see that unfold in a minute. He has salvation now. What else does it say about the arrival of the king? The king is lowly. The king is what? This king who is just and perfect and righteous, the Messiah, the promised one, he is lowly, and he comes to Jerusalem on a donkey. He rides in a portrayal of utter humility. That's astounding. This vision of the Messiah. And it's why I wanted us to look at chapter 9 and verse 9, because this picture, it's difficult to understand unless we back up to realize that God chose to come to us. That God chose, and when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, do you remember the timing of that? Why? When? What was going on? It was the Passover time. He rode into Jerusalem to die. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey to die. The timing of his arrival in Jerusalem, as God reveals this message to these returned exiles in Jerusalem and says to them, your king is coming to you. The king is coming to Jerusalem. The king is coming in this way. He is just. He has salvation in his power. His authority is to give salvation, to give mercy, to rescue, to make you whole, to make you right. He does that, but as he does that, he rides in on a donkey. And from the Gospels, what we know is he rode into Jerusalem because he knew it was time. It was necessary. He set his face toward Jerusalem because he knew he was going there to die. It was time for him to become the sacrificial lamb. And he rode in on a donkey, humble, lowly, determined. And as Jesus did so, he fulfilled the word of the Lord that we find in Zechariah 9:9. Now I want to go to the second picture. And I want us to turn our attention to Zechariah 12:10 quickly. And I want you to look at verse 10. This is the second picture that I want to lift up to you from Zechariah 12:10. It is equally astounding to me that this is how God reveals the Messiah. He says this, he says, "And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem." Let me stop. Let me just chop that verse right there. God says, "I will pour out on the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of David. I will pour out." And if I just hit that chopping point right there and say, I'm going to guess, I'm going to fill in the blanks, what I'm going to say is that God's getting ready to say, "And I will pour out on the inhabitants of Jerusalem my judgment. I'm going to pour out my wrath." Because if you remember, we've read in chapter 1, it's time to return to me. It's time to return. We know what's going on. The Hebrew word is dilly-dally. They have dilly-dallied around. That was a joke. You can laugh. It's okay. They started well on rebuilding the temple, but they have delayed, and there's a need to reform their hearts. And if I just chop that verse off and I start reading, and it says, "I'm going to pour out on the house of David and on Jerusalem," I expect wrath, but that's not what it says. That's not what it says. It says, "I'm going to pour out the Spirit of grace." Underline that in your Bible. The Spirit of grace. The Spirit of grace and supplication. Grace is a word we use often in the Christian world. Grace, we talk about how it's undeserved. We talk about how it's unmerited. We talk about how God is the source of grace. The Spirit of grace. Supplication may be a word we don't use. Supplication is a request for favor. It's a request. It's a request to find favor. Supplication is brought when favor is requested. And what this means is that God's going to pour out grace and supplication. Do we really get the fact that God intercedes on behalf of us for favor? Do we really get a hold of that? Do we really grasp that God wants the best for us? That when it comes to the justice, when it comes to sin, when it comes to the judgment of God, when it comes to what is right and righteous, God has interceded for us in Christ for favor, for our good. Let me go on. And then it says this. How far is he willing to go? Let me introduce the second half of this verse with a question. How far is God willing to go in his grace and his favor? How far is he willing to go? It says, "Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." Yes. Yes, how far is God willing to go? He's willing to send his only son to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey to visit the house of David, to visit Jerusalem for the purpose of dying, and not just dying, but Jesus is going to willingly give himself on a cross and allow those who scoff him and mock him and crucify him to pierce his side and then look upon him. It's interesting. We won't visit the tie-in with Revelation, Zechariah and Revelation. Interesting to study those two side by side, but you will recall in the opening picture of Revelation that there is a description there where it says when Jesus comes back that all will see him, even those who pierced him.